Welcome into this edition of Hand Raised Guys. This will be the Friday Oxford Exxon Podcast. For all of you that know the drill by now, we'll get to talking about Southern and Comer in a second. Chase Parham and Brian Rippee here with you. Neil with some obligations, so Brian pitch hitting here for Hand Raised Guys, a pre-recorded edition. We'll talk some football. We'll talk some other stuff too, as Ole Miss and Auburn squaring off 6 o'clock Saturday evening from the Plains there at Jordan-Hare Stadium. A much anticipated game between Hugh Freeze and Lane Kiffin and the Tigers and the Rebels and the whole deal. So we'll get into all that. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Comer and Southern. They got different names, but they offer the same great product, same great people, same great services. If you're in Oxford, Batesville, Tupelo, the surrounding area, that's Comer, 662-801-1777. If you live in Hernando, Memphis, or the surrounding areas, call Southern, 662-429-4429. Typically, we are in the Clark Ford studio, Clark Ford, Amory, Mississippi, 662-257-1900, Highway 25 South there in Amory. Corey wants to be your truck guy, wants to be your car guy. He will help you out wherever you are in the car buying process. So give him a call. He'll get you a quote, and you can be on your way to being in your next vehicle here soon with Clark Ford. And as always, our guest on the Campbell Clinic hotline, Campbell Clinic now in Oxford, handling all your orthopedic needs. Probably get somebody on here soon to talk about Brock Bowers' tightrope procedure, as he is out for the season there for the Georgia Bulldogs. Huge news, but we haven't gotten to that part. Rebels and Bulldogs here a few weeks away, as Ole Miss has some business to take care of first. Rippee, you in for your day job? I know we're going to get you out of here for too long. You got a little dinner tonight. You every time I talk to you, you're always just working for the man at some point, 8 to 5 during the day.
Yeah. Campbell Clinic actually right next to Life Dental Oxford. So I guess free advertising for them there. But yeah, dealing with a lot of dentists, learn more about dentistry than I've ever cared about. But, working with some good people. Enjoy Mike Huggins a lot.
So Neil and I kind of spent Wednesday on the Oxford Exxon podcast talking about Freeze, doing some Freeze legacy stuff, what that was like. With you being a good bit younger, what was sort of your impression 2012 to 2016 through that Hugh Freeze era in Oxford?
I think I'm the perfect demographic in terms of people being Hugh Freeze stands, because that was right when I got to college. I got to college in the fall of 2013. So that was Hugh Freeze's second year. The first actual night of college was the Thursday night game against Vanderbilt. The Jeff Scott run, if I'm not mistaken, happened that night. And he provided, if you ask most of my friends, most of them understand what he did to the program after he left, but he provided what many of us still think is the greatest years of Ole Miss football, at least in the modern generation. From Alabama to 2014 or the repeat in 2015. He provided a lot of great memories at a time where you're kind of like the core, I say core of the fan base, like core of the in-stadium experience, right? Sitting there in the student section. That 2014-15 year was actually before I started covering football full-time as a reporter. So I would say if you ask someone my age, the average person would have certainly more good memories than bad. And your average fan probably doesn't really understand, particularly because he didn't have to coach that 2017 season out. And, the crater of talent, particularly on the defensive side of the football that he left behind and all of that. So I would say if you talk to the average person who's my age, in particular, if they were in college at Ole Miss during that era, they would have much more fond memories of Hugh Freeze the negative ones. And maybe if there's some subscribers out there, they might be the culprits of the let's hire Hugh Freeze back every time Ole Miss has a coach opening.
So you started your college career with the big recruiting class getting there, 2013, Kimdichie, Treadwell, Tunzel, all that kind of stuff. And then you get an NCAA basketball team with Marshall right there and the College World Series in baseball the next year?
That is correct. That basically consisted of my freshman year of college. It was a hell of an introduction to Ole Miss. I remember being I joined a fraternity that fall, and I remember being at the house on signing day. Everyone had skipped class, and they're gathered around the TV like it's Christmas morning, and it goes from Tunsil to Kimdichie to Treadwell. I don't remember what order they committed in, and just people are going absolutely apeshit on a Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon about recruiting. You get the NCAA tournament that year too, and then I forgot about Omaha toward the end of that year. But yeah, that was my freshman year of college and freshman summer.
You were the college version of when Ole Miss was in Omaha this last time in 2022 and wins the whole thing. Like, I was talking to a buddy, and his his kid was like 7 or whatever, and he's watching, and they win the national title, and his kid looks over at him. He's like, "We never lose," and it's like, "Oh, buddy, just wait. No, actually, like you're getting your pinnacle right here in first grade or whatever you're in. Like, don't worry, it'll come."
I remember, again, a lot of out of state people attend Ole Miss in general. Several of my friends, fraternity brothers, were out of state guys, and of course, it's their freshman year of college. And I remember my dad in 2003. We were at our seats during the Eli last year, and they were beating the hell out of Alabama in home during that game. And he looked at me and was like Ole Miss doesn't beat Alabama like this. This doesn't happen. I was like, the hell with that. This is all I really remember. This should happen every year. And a lot of my friends had a little bit of that syndrome where it's like, this is amazing. Ole Miss is a powerhouse. It's like, whoa, hold your horses, buddy. This doesn't happen a ton.
There is something, it's funny you talk about Freeze in that light, because I get it. The success of a football team or the athletic programs, that goes a long way towards sort of signifying what your college tenure is like. I mean, what the excitement level is for the fall and weekends and all those things, because I spent an extra semester in college. So I had 5 falls while I was in school, but the last 3 were Cutcliffe's last year and then Orgeron's first 2 years. So it went the complete opposite way, where, I mean, I was through the entire, and now I was working for the DM the last couple of years, but I mean, it was the Brent Schaefer experience and Miko McSwain and, I mean, Seth Adams, and the whole gang was here from an Orgeron standpoint. And, you're not, I mean, there's nothing exciting about football season. They're going to lose. Like, yeah, you got road trips, you got stuff, but you probably are close to that. It's funny. It's the middle, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is interesting to me. I think that the middle ages are the ones that probably are the hardest on Freeze, because they'd seen Eli. They expect certain results. They think Ole Miss can win at a high clip, all those different things. But you've got the people that are closer to your age that are, and we're give or take 10 years apart, the people that are closer to your age that got that college experience, have kind of known this modern era that's a different deal, and Freeze took them in this and did this, and you get a Sugar Bowl during your career and all that stuff. And then the older generation who got their return to New Orleans and the return to the Sugar Bowl, and, the first time since the 70s, and Archie and all that kind of stuff. I feel like it's the people in the middle that are like, no, that was just a freaking train wreck. And then on both extremes on the outlier, you have people who are more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, 100%. And like from my vantage point, I didn't really have any of like the bad memories as going to games as a student, because I went in 2013, 2014, and most of 2015. I was getting like started at the Daily Mississippian in 2015. So I was covering like practices, and I think I maybe covered a game or two. But 2016 was when I was the sports editor full time and covered all of football. And that year obviously sucked for a myriad of reasons, but that's also when they moved the student section to that crappy area over in the sun where everyone was just baking in this tin sauna. And so like, I never got that, but it was interesting, like talking to my friends and roommates at the time of like the downfall of that. And it was still fun because if you remember early in that year, they're up on Alabama 24-3, and then they beat the hell out of Georgia. And so there were some fun home games, but it started to get a little miserable toward the end of that year. And then of course, after that, it just became a slog. And yeah, I mean, this sounds conceited, but can't imagine what it's like to go to college when the football team's bad, because I didn't really experience any of that. Every week was awesome. Every week was fun. It made you more incentivized to go on road trips and do the whole thing. I went to Alabama in 2015. I can't say I would have done that if Ole Miss was in year 2 of Ed Orgeron, and after hearing those stories and being like, do you want to go down to Baton Rouge? I'd be like, I'm probably good. I don't actually want to do that.
You went for just the trip at that point. Like, I remember we were covering it, I guess, but like a group of us went to like Columbia, Missouri, whatever year that was, like 06 or 07. And they go up there and Chase Daniel just beats the hell out of them. Like Patrick Willis had 1,000 tackles, but nobody else on defense could do anything. And they won 38 to whatever. That was a game where the only thing I remember about that trip, other than some shenanigans, like with the group I was with, is I sat by Joe Poznansky in the press box that day.
Wow. What is
somehow the visiting sports editor for the student paper got sat next to Poznansky.
What's he doing in a press box then?
I guess he was doing columns for the Kansas City Star maybe then.
Okay.
I think that's right. And maybe he was national and he just happened to be there because of Chase Daniel or something. I don't really remember, but for some reason, I think he worked in Missouri, and he was just hanging out in the press box. And like I sat down, I kind of looked over, and I mean, I'm a media dork. So I look over and I see his name. I'm like, oh shit. Like, wow. Okay. Like I'm doing this thing for the next whatever. I remember that, and the game started at like 11 a.m. and they had really good. You wouldn't think this because press box food is typically press box food. Gravy and biscuits that were excellent at like 11 o'clock in Columbia, Missouri.
I actually remember that from 2019. They had incredible food, and I was now that you say that, it was very surprising. Normally you just get the normal stuff, and I mean, no one other than journalists love free stuff and free food more than anything in this world. But I actually remember them having great food. That was actually a good environment that night. But yeah, that's the crazy part about it too. You mentioned just going for the road trip. When I was in school and we were doing the LSU thing in 14, Alabama 15, and the ones in between, every single week felt like the biggest game on earth. Like, I mean, both those road trips I just named off the top of my head, I believe College Game Day was at both of them. So it wasn't like you're just going for the trip and you know the outcome. Like every single Friday night leading up to it felt like the biggest game you'd ever attended in your life. And that made it a hell of a lot more fun too.
So, I know you were in the media at that point and you were doing student stuff and whatnot, but when it all falls out with Freeze, did you know everything that had been going on? Yes, no. I mean, what was the shock level? I mean, what was that week or those couple days like when it all falls in?
So when it actually went down and they did the firing, I was actually on a hiatus from the Ole Miss beat, if you'll call it that. I was doing an internship at the Arkansas Democrat Gazette in Little Rock, covering things like toy boat races and Miss Arkansas pageants, which is just incredible work. I worked for an Ole Miss alum there, nice guy, Shay Stewart. But non-sports, I realized that
Arkansas
summer.
pageant.
I did. I covered the Miss Arkansas pageant. The lady who won was Savannah something. I covered a toy boat race in Heber Springs, Arkansas. I did all kinds of weird stuff. I covered doomsday preppers, and like the fact that they think like the Arkansas hills are like God's chosen land if a bomb or whatever they think is going to happen comes off. I did all kinds of stuff that summer.
Hold on a minute. Why was Doomsday? I'm going to get back to Freeze in a minute. Why was Doomsday prepping a story at that point?
So Arkansas, and I think particularly, and I may butcher this now, Northwest Arkansas has a large population of, I would say, I don't know, I'm not a ton familiar with the doomsday prepper community and their terminology, but I would say open doomsday preppers. And it has a lot to do with, if I remember this correct, like the topography of the state. Like it's still fertile farmland, but there's hills and enough going on to where that's a big like hub of like, hey, if the world's going to end and they're in this club of doomsday preppers, like that's where they're going. So if there's anyone out there listening that's planning to end the world, just start with Arkansas because you're going to get your toughest soldiers or resistance there. But
were they
I don't
willing
remember
to
why
talk?
that was a thing, but we covered two of them for like 2 weeks and wrote a story about it. I was on a team with like two other people.
They were willing to talk about it?
Yeah, they were willing to talk about it. And some of them were like, a couple of them were probably exactly what you're thinking as you're listening to this. And then some of them were like normal people where something had like super traumatic had happened in their life and it triggered some sort of like mechanism in their head to, I need to be prepared for anything. And so some of them, it was like, you know, God or my higher power or whatever I think is telling me to do this. And some people had just like, I think there was a guy that we interviewed in there that maybe he was like walking down a street in Los Angeles and his friend walking next to him got like hit in a drive-by. It's like something super traumatic to where it triggered something about, I need to be prepared for anything. And apparently there's a ton of them in Arkansas.
Okay.
Yeah. So
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're good. On the front, I still tell that story to people and they're like, you did what now? I'm like, it was a wild summer, man. So the freeze part of it, when that actually happened, I'm not actually at Ole Miss, but I do remember distinctly one day when it was like February of my senior year in college. I'm like at the outgoing sports editor at the DM at that point. And one of Paul Feinbaum's producers DM'd me on Twitter asking me to come on the show. And it was the day after Ole Miss's second notice of allegations had become public, or they got it or whatever happened. And I guess Feinbaum wanted a student's perspective. So they asked me to go on there. So of course I'm trying not to like wet my pants being like, holy cow, I'm going to be on TV. But I remember someone from the Ole Miss athletic department, won't name who it is, like reached out beforehand. It was kind of giving me the like, you know, there's two sides to the story type thing going on. And I was like, okay, this is bad. Like this is getting to a point where it's seemingly untenable. And I was super naive back then. To say I knew all of the details would be pretty slim. Honestly, a lot of what I picked up is probably conversations off the record that you and Neil, and that me, you, or Neil had. And so I sensed it was getting bad, but at the time, I really couldn't have forecasted the fact that he would not make it to the 2017 or 2016, 17. I get my years mixed up. 17 season, whatever that
season.
was.
Yeah. I mean, the day that it goes down, I mean, I can remember, because we had, the media day was so weird, and he sort of got through it, and he was coached pretty well, but you could tell that all kind of stuff was going on.
When he filibustered in Hoover, I knew something was going to pop within the next 10 days. That's maybe the point I knew.
Yeah, and that night, it comes out that, hey, no, he's out or whatever. And I mean, I was sitting down at dinner. I actually remember this. We were cooking baked ziti. I don't know why I remember that, but that's what was on the menu for the night. And I was like, hey, I'm out. I'm headed to the pavilion, because I sent a text and they were like, okay, it's at the pavilion. We're gonna have his press conference with Freeze's dismissal or whatever. Park in the loading dock behind the pavilion was basically what they said or whatever. And I think I was asked, like, hey, what time you be back? And I'm like, middle of the night, early morning. I don't know. This is gonna be a minute, because we went straight into a post show, like did a podcast, a stream or whatever right after that. But I walk into the pavilion and I'm like, okay, I got like 5 minutes before this thing starts. And I walk into the restroom, and Bjork is in there, and he's like tucking his shirt in and fixing his tie, and he's been like sweating profusely, and he's like trying to like fix his hair and like wipe his face off. And I'm like, rough afternoon, like what's up? And I was kind of making a joke, obviously, because I knew what he'd been doing or whatever. But he had spent like the last 3 or 4 hours trying to talk Hugh into like stepping down and not making it more complicated than it was or whatever. And I mean, dude was strung out. Like I felt really bad for Ross in that moment, because like he was trying to put it together, knowing that in 5 minutes he had to get out there and try to explain what was not explainable, frankly, from a public standpoint at that moment.
Which is incredible, because if your boss encourages you to step down, what do you think is going to happen next? How do you disagree with your boss?
Well, I mean, he was trying probably to save some of the cash. I mean, the deal was, hey, step down and we're not paying you $17 million.
That's fair.
Because that's what I keep always coming back to, is they're like, well, I mean, Freeze didn't do this. And it's like, he didn't fight for $17 million.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. So I forget how exactly that went down, because I was a little bit removed from it. But if I'm not mistaken, it was Walken who kind of broke the story, or was it Walken or 40? Because I just remember.
I remember like 40's tweet or whatever is what
has put his job in immediate jeopardy. And at that point,
yes.
I imagine, that's kind of one of the final times that I remember that. Yeah, I know Neil gets annoyed about this, where you guys will break something, and then like 5 hours later, like someone nationally, like breaking news. That's actually one of the last times I remember that someone nationally, at least the way I consume the news, actually had it first. Did y'all have it before them? What do you remember about that?
We knew that it was going down, but no, not at least I didn't. I don't think Neil did, but best I recall, we knew to be on alert, and it could be at any moment, but I did not know it was in that moment precisely. No, I didn't have that. Because it was just this, like I said, it was this ongoing thing to be able to, because I think 40, if I have this right, 40 was the one that weeks or months later actually had a list of the phone calls and some of the places that he had procured services at that point.
Well, they're just massages that didn't honor his marriage. But yes, your point's well taken. Yeah, he did. And I can think of a source or two where he got that from.
Yeah. So I think that was kind of how I think 40 was still involved at that point with that. What do you expect Saturday night? I mean, environment wise, what's Freeze going to be like? I mean, I think Kiffin's pretty locked in. I mean, I think everything that happened last fall, I think he knows that Freeze is about to give him his best shot. This is a game that for Lane, if you win it, it gives you 2 really good weeks. Because you're going to beat Vanderbilt next Saturday. You essentially get 2 weeks to take on the Aggies, and you're going to have this big record and be ranked in the top 11, 12, 10, 9, whatever you are. I mean, it's sort of that swing critical thing where you just take care of business. But the environment in Auburn is really fascinating to me, because they're not turning on Hugh necessarily, but they're turning on this season. They know this season is bad. They're not very good. They're sort of high strung about that. They allowed their own media to give them expectations that were not possible. I mean, Grind, who's in our stream every morning, huge Auburn fan, he was talking about, a lot of the media predicted 8 wins for this Auburn team. That's something that's not even feasible at this point for that program and this team here in year one under Freeze. I'm just sort of curious what this looks like from an environment, from an atmosphere, and then what Hugh acts like on Saturday night.
I think it'll be pretty crazy. I know I've told this story multiple times on my own show, but Auburn to me is one of the most underrated loud environments in the SEC. I remember being down there. It wasn't the first time I'd been down there, but Ole Miss goes and plays there in 19. And that was when the defense played out of their mind. The offense couldn't really do anything. But there was a point where Ole Miss had a chance to go like tie or extend the game in the fourth quarter. And that's when you're standing on the field. And I'm looking around like, man, this place is loud. Like I'd been to LSU and Alabama and on the field at that point. I remember it being everywhere up there with that. So I've always kind of viewed that as an underrated loud environment. I think they'll be keyed up for it. For some reason recently, or really in recent history, this game's always been around like the sweet spot of football season, mid to late October. For a while, it was kind of around Halloween. I think people will be keyed up for it. They're back home after going on the road to LSU the week before. And I think they'll probably, I don't want to do the whole, they'll view it as their Super Bowl thing, but they probably, for better or for worse, the optimistic side in them views this as a winnable game. And so I think the environment will be pretty electric. As far as how I think the game's going to go, unless Ole Miss completely trips over its own feet coming out of the gate, I just don't really see how this game remains competitive for longer than 2.5 quarters maybe. And it really just centers on Auburn offensively. I think they have a very good defense. We talked about this with Weldon on Monday. Ron Roberts has just been great everywhere he's gone. Just classic career defensive coordinator who's been really, really good, and they do a good job in maximizing what they have. But their quarterback play is so bad. I mean, after watching that Cal game and you watch what happened with Peyton Thorne and then like the weird Ashford rotation, and I'm not even saying Freeze is wrong for this or his offensive coordinator, whose name escapes me, is wrong for this. But when you come out of a game like that and you're still very conclusive in the fact that Peyton Thorne is the best option to run your offense, you're in a bad place. I mean, I was just looking at raw numbers last night. Auburn averages 155 yards a game throwing the football. Like the next closest is something, I can't remember if it's Vanderbilt or someone, Mississippi State maybe, that's like 196. So they're 44 yards or something like that below on average throwing the football per game than the next worst team in the conference. And then Weldon had a stat the other day. I think it was the first time this season they'd thrown for 100 yards against an FBS opponent last week, and it came in garbage time against LSU. I don't really know what you do. You talk about Freeze and his first year magic, and what he did in 2012 was incredible still to this day. But if you don't have the quarterback play, like a Bo Wallace or someone serviceable like that, I just don't know what you do. And I think this Ole Miss is rounding into a good-ish SEC defense. And so, again, unless you get an early turnover, you just gift them 10 points out of the gate with a short field or something like that. I really just don't see how this game remains within, 10 points or so for longer than a half.
That's what I said on Wednesday morning, was that essentially if Ole Miss loses this game, it's because they lost this game. Auburn didn't win it. They screwed up. They played really poorly. They had turnovers. They didn't figure out, if Jordan Watkins doesn't play, they couldn't figure out how to get the ball down the field wide receiver wise. Like something has to go haywire on their side. If Ole Miss plays at least a B-plus game, they are going to win the football game, period. It doesn't really matter what else happens at that point, in my opinion. So I think that's it. I sort of expected maybe not any kind of like chatter, but either side to tweet a little more this week. It's been very quiet. Lane has had just a bunch of motivational stuff, normal Ole Miss stuff, nothing at all geared toward Auburn really whatsoever, outside of a picture of Knox several years ago doing a little dap thing. And then Hugh, other than mentioning a couple country music stars, has done literally nothing this week either on Twitter. If either team wins, does their head coach go a little more aggressive on Saturday night into Sunday on the social media?
I would say Lane is more likely to than Hugh, and I think the reasoning for my answer,
Hugh's not allowed to.
That's what I'm saying. I think he's got the parental control on his social media, because it was pretty tame throughout the offseason. He had that one blow up this summer where it was like, damn it, this guy got his password back. He responded to something he wasn't supposed to. I can't remember. Been pretty tame since. And yeah, I was a little surprised by that too. Lane had the opportunity. He got lobbed the trampoline to jump into the mix on Monday. Whoever worded it the question perfectly, in my opinion. He could have gone with like something Auburn related or facing Hugh Freeze, and he just went with the straight up, what's your relationship like with Hugh Freeze? Which I think was the best way to ask it. And Lane went with the whole, I appreciate what he did when my brother was here and how he treated him and stayed out of the weeds. And I thought that was a pretty firm indicator of how the week might go. Now, there was a part of me that was like, he's going to say this and then get on Twitter 4 hours later and tweet something about Sokolov or something absurd. And it hasn't happened. And the question that's made me think of throughout the week is, has he learned from the Get Your Popcorn Alabama show after getting kind of his tail, getting humbled a bit over there again, and how to handle that? Because that was really the first loss where he kind of went with the whole "it's all on me" thing. Is it more of that, or is it just the fact that he doesn't actually care enough and this is not as long-standing and it's really not as personal, despite there a week or 10 days where it got kind of strange back last fall?
He just doesn't treat anything except for Alabama that way. That's it.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, Alabama's the one thing until he – and now, look, maybe next year he doesn't do it. Maybe he has learned and that's it. But until he doesn't do it, that's the way it stands. It's just Alabama. But I read Lane I read him as being incredibly focused and pretty locked in and determined. I can read his press conferences a little bit. He doesn't ever say anything, so I don't make it act like I know the guy. But just from the standpoint of, sometimes he's joking around. He's trying to have a little more of a relationship. He'll give some barbs that he doesn't really mean seriously. It's like the thing with Sokolov. I actually think he likes Sokolov. He sort of just screws with him because, I think he actually kind of likes the guy. So he's messing with him. And he's looser in the games that, he probably thinks he's going to win or he's kind of whatever. I think it's more of no, like, we're going to get a shot. We need to go take care of this. Like, this is business. I think he's very much, I've criticized him at times for saying pro mindset, but not acting like it with social media and the way he treats games and things. I thought he was very pro mindset on Monday. I thought it was no, and even the thing of, I get it's talking points, but it's also something he's aware of. Lane really likes making history, if you will. And he pointed out, well, we haven't won back-to-back games against Auburn in 71 years. Haven't won but once on the plane since in 2 decades, I think is the way he described it, 2015 and 2003. I think he was very much already getting all the talking points ready for when they win the game. He was going to go, hey, here's what we did, and we did this, and we did this, and we did this, because, it's probably something Lane doesn't get a lot of credit for that he deserves, is his ability to increase, or he gets credit for increasing Ole Miss's national standing, don't get me wrong. But the way he's been able to simply make them a team that is no longer a cute story or just a team that kind of came up on the rise. Because, I saw Michael Katz put it out on Twitter on Wednesday that Lane and Hugh have the exact same record as SEC coaches through their first 50 games.
Interesting.
They were both exactly the same, whatever the number was. Maybe it's 50 games, maybe it's 55 games. They were like 35 and 20 or something like that. But even when Hugh was winning those years, and he beat Alabama and he did all that stuff, and they got to 2 Access Bowls, and look, they had a ton of success. They're winning with this signing class in a way. It's kind of what everybody said, because they get the second signing class. It's Greg Little and Shea Patterson and all those guys, but all the shit fell apart at that point. They weren't able to actually take that all the way through and show that this is another class. In some ways, it was Hugh winning with a class versus winning simply at a program that now is here, because he couldn't get that extra year. And I think with Lane, and maybe it says something about Lane's national standing as a coach, I don't know. It was debatable what it is. Lane, instead of that, has just simply made Ole Miss a good SEC football team that wins a lot of football games. And that's all there is to it. There's no, yeah, but they're this, or yeah, but they're this, or hey, they do it this way. And that's even with Lane doing so much portal stuff that is a little unorthodox compared to some of the top SEC teams in the country. I think he's fully been able to move Ole Miss into simply one of those 5-6 programs that everybody just expects to win 8, 9, 10 games in a season and move from there. Because, if Ole Miss, avoids just kind of peeing down its leg, it's absolutely no worse than 9-3 this season.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that after the Arkansas win, that feels like the floor now, and anything else would be disappointing, because it would mean you kind of lost a game in there that you weren't supposed to. Not kind of, it would definitely
State or
that.
Auburn.
Yeah, exactly. And so I agree with that. He deserves a ton of credit for that. And then on the other side of that, I just mentioned, I'm not necessarily predicting it's a blowout. I prefaced what we said earlier of, like, if Ole Miss plays well and doesn't make mistakes, I have a hard time seeing this get close. Maybe he finally does the non-Twitter fingers or non-press conference voice, whatever you want to call it, and then just runs the hell up the score if Ole Miss does get up. I don't necessarily think he might take his foot off the gas if Ole Miss does get in a position where they're up a lot late.
No, I agree with that. And, as I said earlier in the week, if Ole Miss wins on Saturday, go ahead and take Vanderbilt on the points next week because he's got 2 weeks to get ready for the Aggies. Vanderbilt's not getting the full attention of the Rebels next Saturday at 6:30 in Oxford. It's just not.
You remember that game in 21 before the Egg Bowl? How weird that one was.
They were always going to win, but
Vanderbilt was like one of the worst FBS teams, or maybe just one of the worst. FBS teams. I was about to say Power 5, and like they slogged through that game, and there's like, what's wrong with this team late in the season? And they played great in the Egg Bowl, and it was like, okay, I now see what happened the week before.
State's not firing Arnett, right?
No, but as we've seen, not even just recent history with Ole Miss and Mississippi State, just across the country in this week-to-week environment of overreactions or hyperbole or just really a roller coaster ride of emotions from fans and boosters and administrators in some case, 0-8 is hard to stomach. If you go 4-8, 0-8, and you're a guy that got thrust into a really unfortunate situation, obviously with Mike Leach passing away, and it was kind of the only option at the time to sustain the program. That's not exactly working in your favor. Your AD didn't really hire you, and by not really, I mean like he didn't. So no, but if they don't win at Arkansas on Saturday or don't win at Auburn, and I guess I'll throw the Egg Bowl in that mix, but I can't imagine Ole Miss has a ton of trouble with that game, and they don't pull off one SEC win, that's a really, really tough sell. And I'll be curious to see what that situation feels like the day after Thanksgiving, if that becomes the case.
Because as of right now, I get it's October the 18th, but I would predict Ole Miss to win that game fairly handedly in Starkville and it not to be overly close. And it's down there. It's the whole deal. It's already they don't like him. I mean, because look, they had to scuffle past Western Michigan last week. That was not the easiest win in the world, and Western Michigan sucks.
With the kid quarterback they brought off the bench from Old Dominion, who just turned into a wizard when he came in the game.
Did you spend time watching that game?
More time than I'm proud of. It just kind of caught my eye in the second quarter, and I was like, I'll keep this on. And I think I had like the Red River game and LSU Missouri on like the other two screens. And I just kind of kept watching it because I think the most surprising part of Mississippi State, I knew, even though it was pitched to them local media-wise, it's not going to be that big of a transition offensively. Watching them be so bad on defense and watching a quarterback of that magnitude, no disrespect to whoever that kid is, complete like 68 or 70% of his passes up and down the field on an SEC defense that was supposed to be pretty good, was just very mesmerizing to watch because I thought Mississippi State would have a very, very good, like veteran-laden defense, and they're just bad. And I expected the offense part of that, but watching that game and seeing how terrible they are defensively was really jarring.
Did you see this yesterday? I guess I missed this, that Shane Beamer broke his foot last weekend.
I totally missed that. What? How?
So they obviously blow the game to Florida. They've been bad despite Spencer Rattler being really good. I mean, I think he's underrated because his team sucks. He blamed everybody, including the water boy, essentially after the game. And then in like the last 2 seconds of the press conference, it was, well, we probably should coach better too. But that's after he blamed the garbage man and the water boy and the ticket attendant and the parking guy and everybody else for the loss.
I saw that clip where he was going into like specific examples of things that are happening out the game where it's like, that's not me. That's on whatever.
We called the plays and they didn't run them.
Yeah, that's not a great look.
I mean, basically not verbatim, but direct quote of, hey, we called these coverages and they just simply didn't do it.
Then he led
that's still on you, bud.
How great recruiting's going, which you know is a very stable situation if that's your thing in mid-October on a Monday press conference.
So Chris Lowe reporting, Shane Beamer broke a bone in his right foot when he kicked a Gatorade cooler in frustration after his team squandered a 10-point fourth quarter lead Saturday and lost 41-39 to Florida. It's also a little funny that he kicked a Gatorade cooler playing the University of Florida. He limped into his weekly news conference, said he did not expect to have surgery. Quote, it was after the game, and certainly that was a gut-wrenching and emotional loss. I was frustrated and kicked something I shouldn't have kicked and thought I was okay, and then the adrenaline of the game wore off before anyone starts the narrative like the head football coach is frustrated and lost his poise and all that. You were there, bud. No, I care. I care about these kids, and I was really upset on Saturday night because I didn't do enough to help them get over the hump and win the football game. It hurts like you know what, but I got to show toughness and fight through it. It's been one of those years.
That just is the sign of a guy, and it's not even kicking it. Coaches get frustrated all the time.
Yeah, sure.
Speaking of 19 Auburn, I remember hearing Richwad just cussing. No one really in particular, just in general direction, through some pretty thick concrete walls as we were waiting for them to come out. But just like the way that quote is weird, the way that's handled is weird. I guess you have to make it public to some degree, because if he's walking around in a boot or a cast on the sideline, it's like, okay, what actually happened here? But just the way that whole thing's been handled is strange. And that's another weird element to it. I guess now if they do continue to lose games, he can blame the medical staff for not getting his foot healthy enough to be able to walk where he wants to walk.
He said he couldn't. He said that he couldn't be on any. He said he couldn't be on any pain medication because it will make him loopy.
Yeah, that's generally how that works. I mean, what does he think? I mean, there's no law against coaching practice on a Percocet, I don't guess, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it either. So yes, I would say that's probably pretty true. But also, you broke a bone in your foot. Like, it's not the end of the world, man.
Yeah, he said that he would not be able to take pain medication on Saturday because he's got to be lucid enough to make the calls. Was the way he described it. He also said, "What do you think
injured players are doing throughout that game? You can't get one of the things they get."
He said the athletic director, who is Ray Tanner, obviously, died laughing when Beamer told him that he broke a bone in his foot. I don't think Ray Tanner's laughing about Shane Beamer's performance right now. I don't think
so either. I actually don't believe any part of that. But hey, I wasn't there.
Tanner has a weird athletic department. Their baseball team has been so scattered, has obviously not done anything to be anywhere close to what they were when he was there, in which he might even appreciate that a little bit. The basketball program's been uneven, except for Frank Martin taking them to the Elite Eight or whatever it was, or Final Four, actually, that one season. And then football's all over the place. I mean, we had that run on the whole former coach turns AD thing and all that stuff. It feels like Tanner's probably in a bit of trouble, though, as this thing maps out. I mean, I have a hard time believing he's getting a whole lot more hires.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, it's just, what his two hires are Muschamp and Shane Beamer. I mean, maybe you get a third one in football. I think it's too early to tell with the basketball coach, because he was in just such a terrible situation last year. And then baseball hasn't really gone very well since he left too. So yeah, not great in your major three sports. I get it. I mean, how much he probably gets some capital of just like, this guy won a couple baseball national championships, he's one of our own type thing. But the health of the major three sports there is not great, I would say.
Off topic, but I'm just kind of curious. I haven't even asked you. You obviously were hanging out with Hayden Buckley throughout the year. Your boy tried to go for a PGA Tour car with Wilson Furr all season. Are you completely on the golf beat? You going to be on a bag here soon? What are we doing?
I don't know if I'll be on a bag here soon, but I did talk to Wilson Furr for something I'm writing next week, and he had a wild one even all the way down to the finish. He's sitting at like 24th in the standings, and he doesn't want to know where he's at. The caddy knows where he's at, and the caddy was like, "Hey, we need to make 4 here," and he duck hooked one 60 yards to the left with water on the right. He later describes as an anti-right swing. Hits a blind 220-yard 6-iron over water to about 30 feet to 2-putt to. He would have gotten his card anyway with a 5 because of the Shad Tootin rules infraction thing, but thinking he had to make 4 to get his card. Wasn't able to make it to the Sanderson because of the football weekend and just not getting down there. Saw Buckley at the FedEx. I guess the one story I had after that was we went and ate barbecue at some place right by the course, and some fans recognized him and sent him a fireball shot, which I had to fall on the sword for because he was like, "No shot, I'm taking that." So I don't know if he wants his future caddy slurping fireball on Saturday afternoons, and he's got a pretty good thing going with his current caddy. So I'm waiting if I get the call, but I doubt it.
So he gets a shot that's only fireball being recognized in the restaurant, and he won't take it. Just one?
No, at this gloomy, like looking barbecue joint. And two, he doesn't, at least from what I understand about him, he doesn't drink like a ton anyway. But he just got off the golf course in 110-degree heat. He's going to have a morning tea time the next day. It's around dinner time. Do you really just want a just gigantic swig of cold fireball? I didn't really blame him there. I respected him for taking the "I'm a professional athlete" move there. And you didn't have to twist my arm too hard.
what you're doing is maybe you're just like one of those clingers on. You're just like close enough to all of them, like in case they need something, in case there's some like, body man at some point that's necessary for some activity. You're right there. You got a few contacts, and hey, we can make this thing work. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of basketball versions of you all over the NBA.
Yes, exactly. We're just in the mix. We're in the entourage. But yeah, maybe they win a major or something and you can write a book about it. That would be pretty sweet. I did serve as like a caddy in a practice round for Fur at the 2012 US Open sectionals. And I remember like standing with other caddies, like, what's your guy doing this year? I'm like, oh, he's 12. He'll actually be back in 7th grade. They're talking about like the Alps tour and all this other stuff they've been doing. I was like, yeah, my guy, he can't drive. Actually, that's part of the reasons we had to be here. So I have some experience.
Hold on a minute. He was at these sectionals at what age?
So that would have been 2012. He graduates college. 2013, because that was actually right before I went to Ole Miss. So he is 5 years younger than me. That would have made him 12 or 13. Made it to US Open sectionals and got actually pretty damn close to qualifying. Kind of blew up on the second 18, but was certainly in the mix there for a minute at the ripe age of either 12 or 13. I can't remember which one it was.
Did he hit it a long way?
Yeah, he murdered the ball. The kid was an early grower. And that was kind of right after one of the first or second future Masters win. And so he's hitting it like 280 off the tee and bombing it. It actually turned up as a funny story. He got paired with 2 Ole Miss alums in the sectional qualifying. He got paired with a guy who played, I can't remember his name, paid nationwide tour events for like a decade and just never really made it on the PGA Tour. But the reason I remember him, he's like 40. He worked in finance up in like Connecticut. He still used a small head driver because he claimed that he had never found anything like big head modern technology that worked. So this guy's like playing with like a brass looking 3-wood as his driver. And he wore an Ole Miss shirt. Then he also played with a guy named Pope Spruill, who played at Ole Miss back in the day, was a mini tour guy with no status. And he was in contention to qualify on the final 7 holes, blows up, makes a double, and misses qualifying. And like his wife was on the bag. And it was like one of those classic early career moments, like, oh my God, I hated that. I had to watch that. And then when Fur pulled a caddy out of the stands to caddy at to qualify for Torrey Pines in his first professional event, he actually thought of that moment when he's got like 5 holes left. He's like, I better not be like this guy. Because I asked him if he remembered that. And he was like, oh, absolutely. That's actually exactly what I was thinking about with 5 holes left.
Are you nervous as a caddy at that point? Just to not get in the way, do something dumb? I mean, I know you know the game, but like.
Oh, the guy was just happy. I think one of the things he told me for that story, he goes, to that guy's credit, he was cool as a cucumber. He didn't really say much unless I talked to him. He had great vibes. He very much loosened the mood because they're walking down 14 fairway in his second 18 and Fur's like right on the line. And he goes, so where do you go if you qualify here? Like, where's the next stage of qualifying? Fur's like, what do you mean? And he's like, what's the next stop? He's like, Torrey Pines. The guy goes, wait, we're playing for the effing US Open right now? And Fur goes, yeah. And he goes, that's pretty cool. With 5 holes left, the caddy that he'd met on hole 8 that he pulled from the crowd had no clue he was caddying for a US Open berth on the line.
So why did he pull him?
Fur showed up that day. So he had just graduated college. If you remember, because of COVID, the RBC Canadian Open still wasn't a thing. So they played that one at Congaree in South Carolina. Fur played the Thursday qualifier to get into the Monday qualifier, made it to the Thursday, did not make it through the Monday. His agent happened to be there probably with a couple other guys and was like, hey, weren't you like a second alternate at locals? And he was like, well, yeah, what does that have to do with anything? Like locals don't really, there are no alternates in local qualifying. If you get through, unless you're sick or dead, you don't really drop out. And his agent was like, let me make some phone calls. Told Fur to show up the next Monday to the sectional qualifying at Ridgeway, South Carolina or whatever. And he shows up and one of the volunteers, like, it's a great day to be an alternate. Dudes were dropping out left and right. And what he didn't think about was PGA Tour guys are the only guys that are like, to hell with it. I'm not doing it. So he waits and waits and waits. Patton Kazire drops out at about 6:45 a.m. And he gets a call and was like, hey, if you're on site, like you got 12 minutes to get to the tee, you're in this thing. So he's carrying his own bag. He makes 3 birdies to the first 6 holes. He hadn't eaten breakfast, done anything. He goes, if I'm going to do this and I'm in the mix, I'm going to have to do it right. So he looked at some old man and said, hey, do you know anyone that can carry this bag? They call a guy from off site because that guy was too old. And he looked at the guy. They didn't even trade names. He was like, go find me as much healthy food as possible. We'll meet at the turn and you can carry this bag. That's how that happened.
Go find me food.
Yeah, he said, if you can find me as much healthy food as possible, I'll meet you on like 10T or something like that. And you carry this bag for the rest of the round. So he basically was like, if I'm in this, I'm not carrying my own bag because everyone else has a caddy.
Okay.
Pretty wild. And then it makes his professional debut at Torrey Pines.
The guy that, and obviously tons of our listeners would know the answer to this, but the guy that kind of all those dudes followed Alabama is no longer there, right?
No, John Howell. He is now back as I think he's the head pro at Annandale. But he was there for quite a while under Sewell or whatever, but he is now back at Annandale. I actually saw him recently. We spent more time talking about Furr's younger brother's rap career than we did talking about Wilson or anything else, but
rap career.
His brother is like a kid phenom. He blew up on Barstool and now has a record deal. He lived with Meghan Trainor for a summer. He played at Lollapalooza 2 years ago. He's like 12. Prentice. So check him out.
So hold on a minute. So they have a phenom young rapper and a professional golfer as their children.
Yes, and there's a sister in the middle. He blew up on a video in Barstool in 21, and like I guess his career took off since. Maybe it was 2020. I asked Furr for the story. I was like, what'd you do in one of your weeks off in Canada? He goes, I went and saw my brother at Lollapalooza. I was like, how many guys with the week off that week do you think were doing that? He was like, I think just me. I think I'm the only one doing that. But yeah.
Oh, wow.
Prentice.
Okay.
Interesting family story for sure.
So I was asked a couple times during the week, I think Hardman was the one who kept doing it, about me getting arrested hunting. I'll tell that now.
For anybody. You dropped this on me before we started recording. I need to hear
a lot of people have heard this. If you have, I'm getting asked because obviously I'm wearing a lot of realty stuff these days, so I'm getting a lot of hunting questions. Realty Rebels, Jackson Dart, Tyler Jordan here this past week. Yes, check it out, MPW Digital. So we were hunting on my dad's land. It was me, two more guys that I was friends in high school with, but I think we were in college. I think we were maybe freshmen in college at this point, but two dudes that I was in high school with. And they wanted to go. My dad was on a lot of land, blah, blah, blah. I went out there. So we get the car to leave, and I had changed already back into like khakis and a polo or like whatever. And they still had like all their camo on because obviously it wasn't their family's house or whatever. So they're still wearing all their stuff. We're in a Ford Explorer, and we get 5 minutes from Dad's house. You look over on the right, and there is a deer out in the field, if you will. And I'm in the passenger seat, the front passenger seat. The guy that's in the back seat goes, hey, hold on a minute. Stop. Point over there. So dude driving backs up, starts pointing out in the field, puts his headlights on it. There's a deer out there. I don't really even know what's going on. I mean, this is true. I'm not even like de-emphasizing my role in this. I have no clue. I'm not some experienced wow hunter. And I hear like rustling behind me, and I'm going, hold on a minute. What is he doing? And sure enough, he's like pulling the rifle out and like loading it. And like he literally hangs the rifle out the window before I even am able to turn around. And you hear, and takes a couple shots. There's a moment in this because the deer doesn't move and you go, oh shit. Like obviously if it's a real deer, he falls or runs off depending on whether or not you hit him. And I'm like, okay, go now, get out of here. Whatever that was not good. And I mean, as soon as we get the car turned around to like head down the road, game warden comes out of the field.
Oh,
lights flashing, the whole deal, gets behind us. And for a split second, the guy driving like gets on the gas for a minute. And I'm like, no. What are we doing? No, stop.
Attack on a felony here, pal.
Yeah. I'm like freaking out. I'm going, no, quit, stop, please. Don't like, no. And, so we get pulled over or whatever. And he thinks because of the way it came from me. So the game warden comes over to my side and basically like grabs me and like throws me on the hood of the car. And I'm like, dude, I didn't do anything. I got nothing, whatever. So he goes, okay, I can't carry all you three you in. So essentially I'm going to get behind you, follow me to the police station or like the jail or like whatever, like in Monroe County. And I mean, we have no choice. So sure. So we follow him, we walk in, and like I know the guy behind the desk. He like looks up at me and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, long story, like whatever. So they put us in these rooms. I mean, almost like interrogation. It's like, hey, they like separate us out. Like, hey, what happened? And I mean, I'm sure we all told some version of the same story. And I'm like, look, or whatever. And the guy's trying to like, hey, you sure this happened? And I'm thinking, okay, it was really bad. I get this, but like, what are we really doing here? Like this feels a little extreme. And I get a phone call my dad, and I'm like, hey, and he goes, what are you doing? I'm like, gonna need some help. I'm gonna need you to come get me. And he's like, where are you? And I'm like, Monroe County Department of Corrections. And he's like,
God.
He's like, what the hell did you do? You've been gone like 5 minutes. And I'm like, well, that deer decoy that's down there on whatever road? And he was like, please tell me. And I was like, well, not me, but yeah. And he's like, all right, like whatever. And I guess like he makes the call. So they come out a few minutes later and they say, hey, 3 of you come up here. And those 2 had to bond out or whatever. And they allowed me to like go on my own recognizance and not have to pay a bill, and I'm released as long as I'll show up or whatever. But both of them had to actually pay the whatever to get out. So we're like waiting on the bail bondsman or whatever. Maybe I like loan some. I forget how it worked, but anyway, we all get out of there and they tell us, okay, here's your court date. And the way the sentencing worked is, I think this spotlighting was the really serious thing, because you put the
That's
line.
what I was going to ask you.
I think the spotlighting was like a $2,000 fine, and then the actual shooting or whatever was like $250 or $300. It was like a $2,500 total thing, but it also carried a potential 5 days in jail. And I had known a guy that I went to high school with that had unloaded. He'd been drinking, and he had unloaded in a decoy probably a year before that. And he was in high school, so this is funny. He got the 5 days in jail, but they let him do it like 5 p.m. to 5 p.m. Friday to Sunday for like 2 weeks, and then like a Friday to Saturday on that 3rd week to like hit his 5 days or whatever. So he was in high school.
Is that like Gen Pop though? I mean, I know it doesn't sound bad,
it's
but
like county. I don't know.
With, other inmates and stuff.
Beats me. So we all have our court date, go in front of the justice court judge, and I'm going first. And the guy goes, hey, do you want to just come up here and talk about it? Like, let's just get through this thing. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. I'll tell you what happened. Like, it's cool. And I'm like the first person going up for the day. And he goes, okay, sign right here. So I sign, and like basically what I'm doing is like waiving my right to an attorney. Oh, okay, fine. I'm sure I have nothing to hide. Well, I come back or whatever, and suddenly this other dude, I mean, it's not like a prosecutor, but it's like an attorney, starts like asking me questions. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute. Like, I waived my right, and I'm like getting interrogated here. And he's like, okay, so what were you wearing? And I'm like, I don't know, khakis and a polo. He's like, what's everybody else wearing? And I was like, camo. And he goes, how many guns were in the vehicle? I was like, 2. And he was like, who were they registered to? And I was like, the other 2 guys in the car. I won't use their names. And he was like, well, what about you? I was like, I was just sitting there. I didn't do anything. And they're like, what'd they do? Well, one shot, one was driving. And like, we're answering question after question after question. And finally he gets done. He's almost like frustrated. He's like, well, if you're found guilty, you're going to lose your hunting license. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. Like, sure.
Oh, the horror.
Like, whatever. Yeah. I'm like, okay. And so the judge goes, hey, come here. And he like walk up in front of him like to the bench or whatever. And he goes, how'd he put it? He goes, hey, just get out of here and we'll call you with the verdict. And I'm like, it's really random, but like, okay. Like, I don't know what to say about that. So come to find out, he was going to let me off, obviously, but he had such a large group in there. He didn't want to let the first person off. So he wanted to get me out of there and then go through like everybody else doing whatever that was in the room and then whatever. So I get a call later in the day, but the guy driving got freaked out when they started asking him a bunch of questions and ended up pleading guilty to everything because he just freaked out in the room. Like, he was like, yeah, guilty. Like, lost his mind. So nobody got jail time, but I'm pretty sure the other 2 had to pay the $2,500 or whatever it was.
So when you mentioned that I figured that's probably what was the case. Was like, I get it, shoot at a decoy. One, game wardens don't screw around. You would have better off like an FBI agent caught y'all in that moment. I feel like even if like a cop or a state trooper, but like game wardens watching you shoot at a decoy that you think is a deer after dark. Those guys don't really play games. And then the other piece of it too, I was like, this has to be a spotlighting thing. I'm not the most experienced hunter by any stretch, but shooting after dark, big no-no. particularly, I guess, when it's on the side of the road in a car when it's fake. Like, that was probably that guy's
Oh,
Super
I mean,
Bowl.
that's what I'm saying.
I finally got these dudes.
I mean, yeah, there is a rifle pointed out, shots are fired, and a spotlight. Somebody in the car is guilty. Like, there's no doubt. Like, somebody has done something very bad here at this point. So,
and that's like the guy that caught y'all, that's his only deal. Like, if y'all had been underage drinking or whatever the case may be, that's nothing to him. But that was right up his alley. And he's like, yeah, these guys are not getting off. That's unfortunate timing. It was a game warden, honestly. But wow. Okay.
his heart rate went up when we stopped. He was like, hold on a minute, they might shoot. Like, whoa, this is like
we got him.
Yeah,
got him right there.
Yeah.
Go ahead and pull that thing out. Pull the trigger on that, buddy. Like, see what happens.
And it was we knew most of them. Like, it was the game warden that was probably the most difficult to deal with, like in the area too. Like
yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but I was kind of roughed up a little bit. He kind of threw me pretty hard up against the vehicle a little bit there when he thought I was the guilty one.
And there's no great way to make a phone call where you're like, hey, Dad, Mom, I need help. Where are you? Well, funny you should ask. I'm behind bars. This is my one.
I will say, though, if you're going to make that phone call, it is probably the best possible scenario. No one is injured. No one is hurt. I didn't necessarily do anything. I mean, if I'm guilty of anything, I didn't yell at them to keep going, but that's not necessarily a crime.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it was okay. And cooler heads, again, I didn't even have to like bail out or whatever. So it was fine.
And kept your hunting license, which I know is hugely important.
It's huge. So Tyler, if you're listening to this, I respect all laws. Don't take the podcast away. We're going to talk to some cool people. We're going to do some neat stuff. So it's all good. What's I guess we'll do picks. So I hadn't done those yet. I need to get those in for in the morning. But what are you going with? What's the guess on Auburn and Ole Miss on Saturday?
I think Ole Miss wins and covers. I think the game probably gets maybe a little weird early on, like we discussed, but I think Ole Miss's offense ultimately prevails. I think it plays out a little similar to LSU, where Auburn just can't really score enough to keep this a game unless Ole Miss really struggles. So I'll go Ole Miss to win and cover.
Is there a game or two this weekend you're pretty interested in?
Alabama, Tennessee, I guess would be an obvious one. I honestly hadn't even taken a huge peek at the slate yet. Who does A&M have this weekend?
South Carolina? No, that's next week.
I feel like when I looked at this on Monday, I was very fascinated by one of them, but maybe I had that wrong. For very separate reasons, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and then honestly, I'm pretty curious. South Carolina, Missouri. Like, does Missouri blow the doors off of them, and then it's just like, all right, they're good.
A&M's
kind of the lighter slate, and then of course Ohio State, Penn State at 11 a.m. is a nice treat for the television viewer, at least.
11 a.m. too.
Big noon kickoff or whatever they call it. I would imagine that's what that is. And then one under the radar, Duke FSU. That could be a weird one.
If Riley Leonard is healthy.
Yes.
I have a hard time believing that's doable without that.
Yeah, in Tallahassee, no shot.
Is that where it's at too?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you see where was that a true thing? Last thing here. They didn't show the Taylor Swift thing the other night, and Al Michaels said that he didn't cover Access Hollywood. See this quote?
I have no idea. I didn't actually watch much of Sunday Night Football. I was busy, which I usually watch it every week. I don't know. I have not seen this. I guess I can offer a supplement. My boss at my day job, God love the guy, great dude, enjoy working for him. We were in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we were just like in between like things we were going to talk about, and he just goes, I am so sick of Britney Spears and Travis Kelce being on my TV. And like everyone in like my side of the room like looked up and was like, what's he talking about? And I was like, what? He goes, Britney Spears and Travis Kelce. Yeah. And I was like, Taylor Swift? He's like, yeah, same thing. I was like, well, not quite. And I'm not even very well versed in pop culture. So it's hitting all generations. I think they're tired of seeing it on their television screens.
Let's see. Let me find it here real quick because I found the quote funny. We'll go with Sports Illustrated. I think that's probably a reputable one. Yeah, he says, looking for the exact quote. Kimmel then played the clip of Michael saying Swift was Kelce's good buddy and girlfriend, which got laughs from the studio audience. Quote, it's hard because people tune in to watch a football game, said Michaels. I'm not doing Access Hollywood. At a certain point, it's like, where do you go from here? So he did
Voice
this
of
on the
reason, Al
Jimmy Kimmel
Michaels.
show.
And if there's anyone with enough clout to say that, it's probably Al Michaels. He can probably do and say whatever the hell he wants.
We had to be judicious. We had the game last Thursday night in Kansas City. We knew she's going to be there. How much do you show her? She'd been on twice, and football fans were going enough. But we were praying she'd come in the booth and sing for us. He was joking. I had to acknowledge it, but what do? You can't fool around. Otherwise, people will say that sounds hokey in the whole thing. We had a shot of her, and I didn't know how to describe her. So he wanted to say fiance, but he knew that wasn't necessarily the truth. So he almost said fiance there on air.
That's there'll eventually be a squirrely moment where he just has had enough and he sounds off on the air. I'm predicting that.
Are they still together Super Bowl Sunday?
Oh, who the hell knows? Sure. Seems like a swell guy. We'll say sure. Delay the breakup album till the next summer.
All right. Fair enough. He is Brian Rippee. He'll join me for the post-game show presented by Dead Soxy coming up on Saturday night. We'll talk to Jeffrey Wright. We'll hang out with you guys in the chat. Ole Miss and Auburn, 6 o'clock from the Plains there in Auburn in Alabama on Saturday. So Hugh Freeze, Lane Kiffin, a couple days away from that happening. Again, this will be the Friday Oxford Exxon Podcast. Thanks to Comer and Southern, great people. Look, it's getting chilly. Time to get those heaters ready. Make sure you're all good from a central heat and air standpoint for these winter months. As we're in that time period where we need the hoodies in the morning, and then you can start shedding the layers a little bit by the afternoon. So again, thanks to them, thanks to all you guys, and we will talk to you again on Saturday.